Okay, cool. Recording is up.
Okay, yes.
I'll make friends here.
My parents just watch it.
So what's OG? We're missing CG.
We're just OG or CG?
Jannah?
They're OG.
Okay,
Or,
yes.
I think I'm missing CO.
Oh,
Where's
what team are you?
Where's OO?
Wait, where's CO?
We're missing
We're
CO.
CG.
Oh, there's CG.
Oh, there's CG. Are you?
Wait, no, where's CG? Where's
Okay.
CG? Sorry.
Okay. If I can request people to move.
Oh, Arya needs to charge his computer.
Oh, okay, that's fine then. Okay, CG can
Yeah, we'll sit behind.
over there and then CO's fine.
We'll sit behind. Thank you.
Or over
Yeah,
there.
whatever's
That's
easier.
fine, okay. And you know when you're bringing over that.
I think we can start introduction.
Alright. Hello everybody, and welcome to round 4 of WODS. I'm Nolan, I will be your chair. My panelists will introduce each
Yo, you done.
Let's do the panel as a whole, as we collectively. Okay, now we have speaker introductions, teams, opening the rooms, speaker role, and friends.
Oh, Kyla speaking first speaker. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, second speaker already.
Bro's too locked in.
First speaker, Nicole, she, her.
Second speaker, Sherry, she, her.
CG?
Joy is she, her. First speaker, and Bill. Second speaker.
And CO.
I go first. All of you said that.
And with the Prime Minister, I'll go first.
Love good.
Hello.
Yeah.
Let's make them.
Relationships are negative intelligence.
We grew up on that.
You guys are. Oh, my timer's still going from last round.
My speech will start in 3, 2, 1. I'm gonna first off say what this narrative looks like and how people internalize it. First off, what is settling? I don't think this innately goes is settling for or resulting in less than you deserve or lower than who you are as a person in a partnership. I do think it's more of a realistic expectation of who your partner should be, how you guys cooperate, and how you guys engage with each other on a fundamental level of personhood. There's a lot of unrealistic expectations for relationships in the status quo. I think they, a lot of them include media and social media and how they're portrayed. For example, your partner should basically read your mind, be mentally connected to you on an unnatural level with you. I think this puts a lot of pressure on people in relationships to go beyond their means to make their partner happy because of the fake niceties that you see online, because people are only presenting the things that are really good about relationships and only good about life. I think that this means that people are going on dates when they can't necessarily afford it, or and I don't even just mean in money wise. I think this also means in time wise. When you're both university students, when you're both university students and you're both working jobs and you're trying to do your studies and your schools and everything. Yes, Sherry.
What country is this in?
I think that this manifests in most where relationships I think Western liberalish democracies or in general I think relationships how they impact with narratives specifically and how you actually have the freedom to negotiate relationships more happens in liberal democracies instead of where there's very cultural norms, very cultural expectations of what relationships are. This is the only way that narratives are able to actually have an influence on relationships look like. I think when they're deeply instilled in religious norms and cultural norms, I think you are not able to have much of a delta. So I think specifically this narrative does end up happening more Western ideas where media and narratives are able to have actually an influence on how people love each other and actually have that kind of implication. So I think that this is more likely in that kind of area. But additionally, so like I said, so not only just afford this financially, but also I think for this in time-wise and just personal resources on your personal capital and being able to do this. First off, on why settling down is actually really good, or why the ability to come into a relationship early in life that is long-term and fulfilling is actually a net positive. I think finding a partner in life is really good. Growing as individuals together, seeing the ins and outs and the vulnerabilities of your partnership, and actually trusting each other fundamentally in this way, and spending a lot of time dedicating yourself to this is really essential. I think when you have a narrative that says, do not settle, I think this results in a lot of hyper-criticism of relationships not only internally between the dynamic of the two people in a relationship, but also people externally, like your parents and your friends, who are criticizing every single thing that he does or she does or they do wrong. I think that the thing is that you are likely to get to know somebody better and actually engage with them more when this criticism is lessened and doesn't exist as much, when the narrative is not that you should not settle down. There's so many negatives in this case. But also, having a family and having kids and having the opportunity to do so is also really good. I think that's serving you on a level of self-satisfaction and accomplish it. I think there's a natural disposition for humans to want to further their population and engage with somebody who they can date with. I think there's an animalistic disposition to want to do this, but also the fact is that a lot of us like being able to pass down our wealth, like being able to pass down our family, businesses and this kind of stuff, because it's a sense of belonging and a sense of satisfaction this kind of way. No, I already took out an engagement, it's alright. Also, on their side, you probably have a relationship, don't get me wrong, but I think that you enter it in a lot later in life. I think this will be further explained in my partner's case, but you've likely entered a lot later in life because of this hypercriticism. You are likely, on their side, you're likely to break up and get back into relationships consistently and more often, resulting in trust issues and these kind of problematics as well. But I think if you're able to enter into a long-term relationship earlier in life, this means that you are likely to actually experience the benefits of having kids more proximately. For example, if you have kids younger, for example, you're more likely to be there on those pinnacle events in life, such as graduation, such as marriages, such as sickness when you need to support them. I think all these are true if you have these opportunities at a younger point in life, as opposed to starting a family when you're 45 and you don't have the opportunities to be there in those same ways that you would be able to if you were younger. I think this is also really true. But also when it comes to family dynamics in the long term, having generational wealth or the ability to pass down this kind of thing with strong familiar structures and supporting your seniors in your family is also really important. When you enter a relationship a lot sooner, it means that you have stronger support systems and dynamics that you're able to build over a longer term of time, which means that you're able to support your parents when the circumstances arrive. Seniors are in an more economically vulnerable than maybe the middle-aged group of people or even younger groups of people, because they no longer have a set income that is actually occurring. This is probably because they have a strong family structure that's able to support them and help them in these vulnerable times that they need the assistance when they're getting sick and when they're getting older and this kind of stuff. I think this is also true. Also, just on a level of the actual relationships itself, I think this allows you to have the ability to have proper discourse. Note to my start of this speech when I tell you that the narrative that says you should not settle results in a lot of hyper-criticism because of everything is she, he, they are doing this wrong, you should not settle for this because they're doing an error. You should, that's how these kind of things are interpreted. One argument should not end an entire relationship, especially when it's fixable. But when everyone else is telling you, you shouldn't settle for him because he made a mistake in this moment, then you are more likely to break up with them with social pressures. The thing is that when you're that kind of stuff. So they're criticized of your dynamic and this kind of stuff. I think this cuts out a lot of unconventional relationship structures, such as structures in long-distance relationships or intercultural relationships or different class demographics. So if you have somebody who's from a wealthy family or a poor family, I think all of these unconventional structures of relationships get cut out because by nature they are harder to go across. I think there's naturally more conflict in these kind of relationships that is definitely doable to supersede, but you actually have to have the patience and the understanding from both yourself and your social support system in order to get through that. Think about it, with a long-distance relationship, a lot of trust issues possibly arise because you can't see your partner regularly. You are not experiencing life with them, so it feels like you're possibly living apart. There's a natural disposition to get in arguments with your partner when you simply just miss them, but it's hard to understand this kind of stuff. If you are arguing with your partner on the basis that you are missing them and they're not there with you and you're frustrated with that, this means that people are going to be well, you guys are arguing all the time, you shouldn't settle, but you're more willing to go through that time of missing each other if you're told that this isn't necessary, if you're told that this is okay and we're allowed to settle for this kind of discomfort. This kind of discomfort is natural in long-term relationships anyway. When finances get involved, when moving gets involved, when kids get involved, when parents get involved, all these kind of things you have to be able to negotiate and talk about this kind of compromise that is so essential. The only way you're able to have a long-term foundational relationship is the ability to compromise, which you don't get on their side of the house when you are leaving at the first sign of fright because everyone is telling you that you ought to because this person is not good enough for you. So I think that it's an idea of that kind of stuff. Intercultural relationships, when you are learning different foundations of how their family operates. If you come from different political structures and you don't understand why dad is cooking all the food when you're raised with moms in the kitchen and you get into discourse, this kind of stuff, you are able to have that conversation because the conversation is encouraged because you actually have the space to do so and the support to go about this kind of stuff. Once again, intercultural relationships, when you're literally learning how somebody's family grew up and rose through the ranks of understanding what it is to grow up in this kind of demographic, you will have the support to go you can wait, you can work through this, you can go through this. I think this is really important. So this kind of relationship is naturally disincentivized because they are naturally facing adversity. You are told that you shouldn't settle. This results in the criticisms of these specific types of relationship. Ergo, a lot of people do not end up having long-term relationships because a whole demographic is cut off. Thank you.
And thank you for that wonderful speech. And everybody else.
Okay. My time starts now. Panel Garmin is trying to tell you that not settling for a relationship means that you're immediately leaving the relationship at like the first sign of trouble. On side opposition, we're telling you that not settling for a relationship means putting in the work on the relationship, calling out your partner's BS, and having open communication that doesn't exist on government side of the house, because settling often means keeping your mouth shut when you have a disagreement, when you see a red flag in a relationship, and not actually advocating yourself for a relationship because you're being told you should settle for the bad things in your relationship because overall it should be a good thing, overall it will get better. We disagree with this notion, proud to oppose. What I'm going to be doing here today, I'm going to be refuting everything that the PM has told us, and then I'm going to be going on to my own point about how this idea of settling significantly, disproportionately affects women and people of color, and second of all, about how settling for a relationship robs the joys of an actual romantic relationship. So first of all, what does PM tell us? We did have this whole argument about how, like, overall getting into a relationship more like earlier in life, like finding what you want, is like a good thing. They first tell us about how humans want to further the population, about having kids earlier in life is like really good, right? First of all, since humans are like biologically like want to further their population, we tell you that humans will eventually end up in a relationship somewhere down the line. That's if they want to. That's not a problem. We just say we're just okay with them taking more time to find themselves, know their values, know their partner's values. But we're doing that. Second of all, they tell you that like, oh, what if you don't want kids like early? What if you have kids later in life? We're telling you that's like completely okay. Like if you want kids at 45. That's fine, like that's your choice to make. We don't see if that was what you got into, like, that's fine. And third of all, we'll tell you that humans live a really long time. Like, people can have kids at the age of 35, and that's still a significant amount of time to like actually like be in the relationship and still be there for their kids' milestones. Don't see the impact of that. And they're also telling you that like getting into a relationship is better, you have more social support. We don't see how that's taken away when you get into it later, because we think getting into a relationship far younger is actually significantly more harmful for people, because it could mean rushing into relationships when you don't actually know yourself as much, you don't know your partner as much, and you don't exactly know what values you're looking for in a relationship, but you're still staying in a relationship for the sake of it because it looks good for you. It's supposed to be what you want in life. We don't buy the claim that it's so much better to be in this relationship younger, to have kids younger, to get all of those like benefits that people want from you earlier in life, rather than waiting it out later if that's what someone so chooses. But first of all, my first argument about how this significantly affects women and people of color, because historically, these are people who have not had a lot of power in relationships. These are the people who've been told that like what their partners are allowed to do, what they're allowed to say to them, how they're allowed to treat them in a relationship, and that's supposed to be okay. But this is also the demographic that's increasingly pressure to get into romantic relationships, to settle for the first thing they see, because a lot of the times a relationship is like a status symbol. For a lot of cultures, it's a sign of prosperity and honor for yourself or your family. This is a significant demographic that is being harmed by rushing to a relationship. And a lot of times these are the relationships who are not settling and not actually like confronting the red flags in a relationship, and what you are dissatisfied in a relationship is what is forming the foundations of an abusive relationship, because it's accepting things that escalate later on, and it's keeping your mouth shut when there's something in a relationship that you don't like, but you're told to settle for it, and that is a normal part of a relationship. Women have been told that for like time immemorial, and you're causing this narrative for these people that you should accept this unhappiness you get from a relationship, and you don't need to advocate for yourself. And to this day, this demographic is like barred from actually learning to like advocate for themselves. Women still get a lot of criticism to this day for choosing to stay single, for getting into relationships later on in life because they want to pursue this. I don't want to settle for a relationship. I don't want to settle for a relationship. I know what I want, and I don't want this right now or this partner right now, and that's not what I like. PLI.
Do women in abusive relationships stay because they lack financial autonomy or because there was a narrative telling them to settle down?
I think it can be both. I think you can lack financial autonomy, and I think there is a huge narrative telling you that this is normal, the way your partner treats you is normal, and like you should be settling for it. We think the counterfactual, we support a strong counterfactual that you shouldn't settle because we think this like balances out this power, this imbalance of power in these relationships, and in the counterfactual, you are heavily advocating for more advocacy. If these women are leaving their relationships more faster, so be it, because of these inherent power balance exists, and how careful you have to be with relationships because of this history telling you that you should accept these bad things. But second of all, how does settling rob the actual joys of a romantic relationship? Because we say a romantic relationship is a really sacred commitment, right? What makes people happy in a romantic relationship? It's that they have similar values to their partner, they have similar life goals to their partner, and most importantly, they have an open and honest communication with their partner. Because like we said, not settling is not necessarily just leaving a relationship if that's not what a person wishes to do, but it's also just staying in it, calling your partner, being honest with your partner. Not settling is a narrative that progresses as the relationship progresses. It's not necessarily ending. It's working on it in the sense where you're advocating for yourself and making sure that what is dissatisfying you in a relationship is either being solved or it's something that overall doesn't bother at the end. These are the questions that you deal with in an open and honest relationship. We think so. Therefore, settling robs you of these values that you're looking for in a relationship, because you're settling for these things. You're settling for these things that you don't necessarily agree. Settling for these things that you don't necessarily agree with. You're robbing yourself of this opportunity to have communication with your partner and be able to follow your consciousness of what disrupts your relationship. And we tell you that acceptance does not always mean happiness. We think our framing is particularly significant because like OG says, we think that people in our side can still stay in relationships, but it means that they're actually furthering their relationships, making sure it's something that they actually want, and not condoning significant abuse in the relationship, especially when it disproportionately affects the significant demographic that wants a romantic relationship.
Thank you for that one. Deputy Prime Minister.
Like the lighting on the camera is so weird. I look like an unlocked character in like Smash Bros.
Arian has entered the room.
Yeah, time on my first word. I will try to take a POI at 5 while I'm closing. Gonna mostly just rebuild the case that we get from Kyla because I think it is not completely insufficiently responded to, but there are some compelling responses from opening opposition and ones that I kind of expected, so I'm gonna also try to push back on these and try to frame them out of the round. Okay, firstly, I think the main central thrust and push that we give you is why having a family is good. I also want to be very, very clear. I want to specifically recognize one specific burden out of DPM. Why do you enter a family more on our side? Because I think it is right and probably justified for opening up the question why you cannot enter a family later on, why this significantly changes from side to side. I'm going to tell you why this is. I'm not going to take a ridiculous burden and claim that you cannot have a family on up, but I would argue that your barriers to settling down are much, much stronger on the opposition side when you don't oppose this narrative directly. First, I think there's a lot of competing narratives within our society. I think the comparative for up is likely a lot of things, as Kyle explained, but one of the most predominant narratives is one of individualism and career success. I think we live in a largely capitalist society broadly that is becoming more capitalist as a result of globalization. I think you have very strong pushes on up to chase corporate success and climb up the partner track at the expense of your personal life with the promise of gaining more wealth and a higher position later on. This is what you weigh more critically when you enter life and when you see your life going forward. I think this, as a result, you probably have less time innately to enter a relationship, to find and to court a romantic partner, to establish the deep emotional connection that is a priori and prerequisite to actually establishing a family, because people do not just enter relationships on a snap. They probably court these people for months and years before you actually establish a family and enter a marriage. Secondly, I think there's an implicit admission of responsibility of others that is hampered on the upside. By having a child and a spouse and having a family, you innately sacrifice parts of yourself. On the comparative, I think you are likely to see in narratives of individualism that are innately reinforced by the absence of a narrative on settling down. Why do I say this? I think the implicit end result of a narrative telling you that you should not settle, and the most predominant framing in our society by which you internalize it is, you do not need someone else to feel complete, you should do what makes you happy, and what you should do what makes aligns with your personal priorities first. This probably then does not want to make you sacrifice the time off work, the time spent with others, the financial and emotional resource drain, because you immediately think how you will not be happy, how you will be sleepless caring for your baby in the short term, and the long-term positive outcomes of maybe I want a family at some point are probably not proximal enough to you to override this level of short-term weight. But thirdly, even if you disagree with this and you think that certain collectivist societies will push you to create a family on either side of the house, because I think that there is some confusion about where this motion is globally situated. Firstly, empirically, this is probably not consistent. Notably, I think Japan and China have plummeting birth rates despite being collectivist societies. But secondly, there is a nuance to being part of a family versus creating one, and a large part of our pushes are based on the transformative experience of creating a family, creating something for yourself rather than just being a child or a grandchild. It is unclear why you will feel the additional push to actually sacrifice and start a family to avoid chasing success on upside. Then, a couple things on why having a family is uniquely good. Darren Manserbeg ran this case against me and won, so I think we should buy it. We're going to run a nice, simple, socially conservative, pro-nuclear family argument. A couple facts on this. Firstly, I think there is a level of responsibility that is unreplicated by having a child. In no other position are you directly responsible for someone's welfare, responsible for catering to another person's needs, and ensure that they are the best version of themselves. Not at this time. There's a deep, pure gratification from this person. Their safety and everything they are lies in your hands. They are a product of you. You uniquely learn to sacrifice and care for others through this mechanism, to be patient for others, to feel strong responsibility that you can never hand away, that you can never push to the side. Secondly, I think being in a long-term relationship is actually quite good. Obviously, in debate globally, I think it's very common to argue that hookup culture is bad. I think we can largely claim these benefits intuitively from opening up. We think that people will treat their partners less disposably on our side when they feel as if they are dating to settle down, dating to find a future partner. They do less things like careless emotional behavior. I think you learn to compromise with your partner more. You expect uniform positive qualities out of them at a less significant rate. Even if we're somewhat unclear as to where globally this motion takes place, I think almost every culture places very special value on spousal love. People love to do things for their long-term partners and view acts of service as a form of emotional release. I love to do things for my ex because it made me feel better, made me feel as if I was a good person and I was doing things for them. This was uniquely emotionally transformative for me, regardless of whatever the outcome of that relationship was. Third thing, on the comparative and an additional mechanism of compromise, I think as Kyla highlights, the comparative in addition to individualism is also a higher level of relationship-based flakiness. I think you prioritize personal happiness very highly and weigh short-term impacts that are very proximal to you and write directly into your near future most strongly. So I think if things early in your relationship irk you or make you unhappy, you are probably going to be directly told by peers that you should not settle. And John, you should buy this because this is the analysis that I used to beat you again on Cup. Okay? I think relationships are a unique testing ground by which you develop social skills. I think there's a different level of intimacy and secret sharing that you engage in when you are part of a relationship. You learn to navigate conflicts diplomatically and civilly more than so than if you were, for example, in a friend group. I think you learn to be patient with others and accept their flaws because the cost of heartbreak and losing the time that you invest into this relationship is so much worse. I think it is actively important that you prioritize practicing compromise in this vehicle because when you fail to practice it as frequently, it probably bleeds over to your social interactions with others more broadly. I think when you learn to settle with others and smooth over your differences in the most private, intimate circles of your life, it sets you up to practice this consistently and further down the line. Last of these were kind of throwaways, but I don't think they were actually effectively responded to from opening up, so I just want to make sure you guys tracked it. Firstly, the thing on seniors, again, it's very throwaway, but I think it's real. I think seniors oftentimes can't work, they're often neglected, they're usually put into very sterile and cruel spaces like nursing homes. I think it is good to have a stable household by which you can economically support your elders. People will have economic security more, they have parents and the caretakers in the household that care for them. I think you also have better connections from elders to children. I think this is quite good because they're able to pass down generational teachings. This is very good for minorities and immigrants that are part of diasporas to Western countries. Also, just the thing on unconventional relationships, which isn't response to it all. I think these people deserve to be happy. I think people in interfaith marriages deserve to be happy. I think people in interracial relationships deserve to be happy. I think people in long-distance relationships deserve to be happy. I think when you do not match the ideal of what a relationship should look like, this is when you get the most level of critique and people telling you not to settle for this, to go for someone in your local area, for example, and ultimately these people lose out on very fundamental aspects of themselves and relationships that otherwise would have made them happy. Let's take closing at this time.
Yeah, this claim is a little bit confusing. I think that things like financial burdens are a much bigger prohibitor for instead of whatever you say about a social narrative.
I'm gonna be real, I could not even hear it because Sherry slapped the table, so I'm just gonna hope that whatever response I give to opening opposition takes care of this. Okay, the flip on side, lots of extraneous refutation I'm just gonna give to opening up. I think their very best pushback is the temporal idea that you can have a family later and therefore they have access to all the benefits that we quote to you. A couple responses to this. Firstly, I think your ability to settle down deteriorates over time because the current dominant narrative in society and on the counterfactual is one of age-based depreciation in relationships. I cannot purchase that you will be able to settle in a family when we live in a society where women are shamed and called expired goods when they don't marry early. early, when women literally freeze their eggs because they have not had an opportunity to pursue a relationship. But secondly, you cannot decide to snap enter a relationship. People tend to court their future spouses for months and years, so you need to actually decide when you're ready to do this well in advance and when you actually want it. This is probably very difficult to do and you don't know when your next career move is going to look like. Thirdly, I just think it's good if people enter families earlier. I think they should be healthy. I think they should be young and present for their families. Finally then, last thing on settling being better and why you won't keep your mouth shut. I think the extreme characterization of abuse that we get from opening up is obviously uncharitable. Narratives don't exist in a vacuum. They need to deal with this narrative in the context of other things like patriarchy, like the financial lack of financial autonomy and independence for women who are battered. I think people tell you to shut up all the time in many, many places. Powerful men will tell you to shut up as a woman in the workplace. White pundits tell black athletes to shut up and dribble the ball all the time. It is very, very unclear on the exclusivity of this argument why this narrative was settling down specifically causes these women to be unable to leave these relationships, to be unable to settle down. I think through the mechanisms we give you, we're actually able to implicitly flip these things because we tell you that you're able to practice better compromising skills, you're able to practice better levels of emotional negotiation because you feel that there's a long-term investment in this relationship and you want to make it work, you want to make it succeed. It's not disposable to you. Proud to close.
Can I record myself as we are recording ourselves? Okay, I hope yes. Also, I'm sorry, Andrew, I didn't mean to clap that loud. I feel bad. Okay. Arian is right. This narrative doesn't exist in a vacuum, which is why the OG case is so absurd. This notion that you're going to go into this hyper-Western liberal democratic individualist perspective where relationships are garbage, children are garbage, you shouldn't have either, is just frankly not the way this narrative has played out. There's two things I want to point out, which is first, we agree that this narrative probably originated in liberal democracies, but we think the recipients of this narrative are likely to go beyond that. And this is for a few reasons. In non-Western liberal democratic countries, there's often been an influx of things like Western liberal media, so things like Instagram posts, social media discussions that seep into places that are less inherently individualistic. This is what's led this narrative to be able to have significant delta, even in places that are not inherently that progressive, such as, for instance, even in places like India, where arranged marriages are the commonplace. Women, even in these places, are still getting more options to choose, more desired ability to do things like have a discussion with their family when they are considering which man to pick, things like that. So even if we're, I think there are these delta areas in these other places that mean there's already countervailing force against the hyper-individualistic nature OG pushes that kind of preemptively mitigate the impact of this narrative. But I think even if we're focused on Western liberal democratic countries, my partner tells you how there's a lot of like immigrant kids that go into Canada and the US with these types of cultural barriers that make it difficult for them to be able to live fully themselves, that have these narratives tell them you should have many kids to bring prosperity to our family, your role is as a wife, as a mother to our children, etc. So I think there are these other narratives that exist, which is importantly why we need this narrative, because it's often a countervailing force to these other narratives that push you to rush into relationships very early on. Your parents tell you, we want a grandchild as soon as possible. That people tell you, as a woman, your biological clock is ticking. That type of thing happens. So where this narrative plays in is by telling women and these minorities not to settle, that there are other options that are available that are much better for you. We give them the kind of mental option to think, I don't need to listen to these narratives right away. I have these other options. I can wait. I can settle my career first. I can go on Tinder and find a lot of options that make it so that I don't need to marry the first man my parents tell me is a good option, right? So I think this is important because this breaks a lot of the very extremist characterization that OG tells us. The next thing OG tells us is this notion of like, the desire for a perfect relationship means that you're like never going to settle, which means you never get into a relationship in the first place. I think there's two things I want to say this. First, it's that if you are someone who wants kids, if you're someone who wants a partner, that desire at some point will overcome your desire to search for perfection. That is, at the beginning of your life, you're likely to be pretty choosy in our case, right? You're likely to want to like scour Tinder, scour Hinge, look for the best options, not give in to the like okay man right away. But later on in your life, when let's say you are realistically aware that your fertility maybe does like not get as good when you're 38, or you do feel lonely because all your friends have settled down, this is time when you also are likely to enter a relationship, and this desire for a relationship will surpass your desire for perfection. So we think this is actually better. And this is why starting on later in life is actually better. Because women at that point, or just generally people at that point, as my partner points out, are able to gain better access to things like financial stability on their own. For instance, they're able to get a job where they've been able to work, develop career capital, have a resume, etc. So they're not reliant on the income of their husbands. Or they're able to have more time to self-reflect, to understand, have a better sense of whether they want kids at all before they're pressured to do so by the husband that when they're 22 that tell them you should have kids right away, or what religious values they want to carry on to their children and which ones they want to leave behind. They have a sense of how to better advocate for themselves as a valuable person when they have lived more life and have more financial and emotional stability. So we think it is actually vastly better for most people, especially women and racial minorities, to enter a relationship and start a family far later on in life when they have a sense of how to advocate for themselves. The trade-off here is something, it'll be harder to care for children, it'll be harder to care for grandparents. I don't know why this is the case. I think probably you're better able to care for your child when you have more money in your pocket rather than when you've just graduated from university and you're rushed into a marriage, you're rushed into having a kid, you might not be able to afford to be able to give them the best life possible. We think this level of financial stability flips this and makes it better for you to have kids later on. The last thing I want to quickly say is even in the best case of government, and ending where you end relationships willy-nilly, this is probably less damaging than staying in relationships for too long, because you are able to avoid the worst cases of things like emotional abuse or being taken advantage of. That is, if you end a relationship early, even if that man was theoretically pretty good, the fact that you have a lot more choice, that is, this narrative that you should not settle, is what has encouraged the popularity of things like dating apps, right? Because as more people don't want to settle, they want to keep their options open for longer. So when there's this availability of choice through things like apps and through the narrative being normalized, this means that you have your eyes available to a lot more options. So if you end a relationship early, you can probably find another guy that's pretty similar, and you can probably live a pretty happy life, even on the worst case scenario for side opposition and the best case for government. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is this notion of sacrifice and something, whatever Arian says. Okay, I think if you want a child on either side of the house and you're going to feel motivation by sacrifice, you're probably going to have one either way. And the reason for this is there's probably strong government desires to push for you to have children in places where there aren't that many children. So if you already want a child, the government is throwing you all these incentives to go have kids. So you're probably more motivated to go have a child. I'll take a POI from anyone. Closing, opening, someone go.
When you tell people that it's okay to settle, this reduces the amount of hyper-criticisms that come from external systems that are supporting you. This means that you're more likely to make a self-decision instead of hiding these from the people around you because they're going to criticize you immediately.
Okay, I think it's extremely unrealistic that there's this hyper-criticism. Two reasons. The main source of hyper-criticism that you say is from your parents. Your parents are probably not going to be the main recipients of a narrative that is this relatively radical / relatively liberal leaning. It's probably going to be mainly young people, mainly propagated on social media, mainly among younger populations, your friends, etc. So I think their influence, your parents' influence, and their more traditional values probably counteract the values you might get from other people in your life that are younger. And so you end up in a middle ground where you're likely to make more rational decisions. Yes, this guy is not perfect, but maybe he's pretty good. Versus you're not just gonna exit every relationship. My partner tells you why there's some amount of how this narrative encourages you to work within the relationship rather than just ditch every guy you see because he's not perfect, right? And again, this coexists with other narratives that culturally push you to have children earlier, to be willing to work with a guy, not ditch them right away. That type of stuff still encourages you to be able to work within a relationship to get better. On our side, we prevent the worst harms for women. We make it easier for people to be happier in relationships.
I can stand anywhere, right? Or do I have to stand here?
By the mic.
Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. 3, 2, 1. There are 3 things I want to start off straight off the bat.
Number one, settling in a relationship does not mean the same thing. It doesn't have to mean the same thing as settling down. The second thing is that we're going to tell you the most important actor in this debate is ourselves, because necessarily, I think, I'm going to prove this after, personal growth and the ability to know ourselves and be a better person is probably the most important actor in this debate. And thirdly, we're going to push in a case where we're going to tell you why this narrative of settling is actually going to be corrective to a bias that we already have that stifles personal growth. I think firstly we're going to tell you what this bias is and how this narrative specifically produces that. Because obviously we all as people have a bias to seek connections and partners that make us feel good, right? And the problem with feeling good is that when we seek good feelings, and that becomes the deterrent and the detriment to the ability to, number one, sustain good relationships, and number two, grow as a person. I think here we're just going to quickly prove to you why is growing personally and like being a better person an essential part of a good relationship, and how does having a good relationship and like actually being in a relationship, the process of being in a relationship, help you grow as a better person. I think firstly, relationships are just a reflection of how we live, what we value, what our goals and futures are, what kind of person you want to be. It is probably exacerbated into the sense that the person that you are sharing a life with is probably someone you want to live the rest of your life with to a certain degree, and that necessarily means that this person is a reflection of what you want your life to be. So necessarily then this relationship is a process in which you are discovering yourself, and I think that is a link that necessarily proves that, you know, the ability to be in a relationship allows you to discover yourself and allows you to grow as a person. There is no distinction between the two. Secondly though, why do we want people that actually makes us feel good? I think number one, everyone perceives the world from a lens in which we have a self-bias that is a good way to live, right? For example, I'm just going to give myself, I'm very emotional, I talk a lot, and I value exercise. So when I'm going to find a potential partner, I don't want to find someone who I deem as emotionally unavailable, but necessarily the way that I value their emotional unavailability will be due to my metrics of what I determine what is the best to be emotionally available in the first place. That is to say then, the way that I evaluate other people's characteristics are going to be based on how I value my characteristic in the first place, and the ways in which I determine like how good is my characteristic and how does that help me operate as a person in the world. So that necessarily means then that like this like quality of like perceiving ourselves is obviously just due to the fact that it is ingrained in us from cultural experiences, life experiences, time, and just the way that we grow as people. So then, knowing that, what do we look for? I think number one, we probably then look for people who don't challenge our perceptions of self and our own insecurities and things that make us tick, right? This is just due to the fact that like, for example, people who are anxiously attached and codependent on their partner probably doesn't want someone who makes them feel like crap for that. So like if I'm someone who's really needy and emotional, I don't want to find a partner who like tells me all the time like, hey, I just need a lot of space. I just need like someone who doesn't bother me as much, because that's going to constantly remind me of the fact that I am not like doing enough for them, and that's going to make me feel like crap all of the time. It is probably more likely then that if I'm an emotional and attached and a dependent person, I want to find a partner that actually enables that and actually makes me feel okay for being needy, makes me feel okay for being emotional, because that makes me feel good about myself. I think oftentimes you'll find relationships in which we probably find people that don't challenge ourselves in that capacity, because we want someone that makes us feel good. We don't want someone to make us feel bad as a person, personally, and also how that reflects in the relationship. So how does that then manifest on both sides of the house? I think when we buy into the narrative that we shouldn't settle, you measure someone and how best they accommodate your way of life on most metrics and most important metrics without compromise or personal reflection. We're going to tell you distinctly then, that means that probably A, you are less likely to actually sustain in relationships in the first place, right? And this like ability to just sustain a relationship to the point in which you can actually discover some sort of personal growth is the key, like I think, margin in which we are winning on this debate. Because I think you need to put yourself in positions of discomfort. You need to put yourself in positions of challenge and like something that is difficult for yourself, because that is the way we can actually challenge our frames of reference. That's the way we can actually challenge our ability to grow. Okay then, what is the impact of this? I'm just going to like talk through how this actually works in a person's mind. I think number one, like if I'm just going to give the example of someone who is attached and needy, you probably one, internalize their actions as a reflection of your insecurities. Maybe that's not exactly how you look at it in your mind, but like that translates then to just you feel like crap, but not necessarily, you might not know exactly why, but you will know the facts of the situation which is like, I texted my boyfriend like, I really want to hang out with you every single day, you don't text me enough, and he goes like, I really want a lot of space, like you're talking to me too much, right? So you have the facts of the situation, and you're going to like internalize it in a certain way. You're going to say, hey, like my boyfriend makes me feel like crap because he told me that he doesn't have enough time for me, but I want to hang out with him every single day. what that leads to then is that you interpret incompatibilities as an external issue, right? You look at it and you say, I haven't found the one because my boyfriend just doesn't like match who I am. I won't lower my standards for the person because I want someone who actually makes me feel okay being myself. But the issue then is that because you don't necessarily actually interpret and realize who yourself is at any moment in time, you're not actually able to grow or identify where you play a factor in this incompatibility existing in the first place. What that means then is that there's just a lack of personal growth overall. So why then is settling, sure, I'll take you.
So why does telling someone to settle mean you're going to find this perfect person who challenges you in all the right ways and allows you to grow, in contrast to the first person your parents find, the person closest to your race or religion that you're expecting?
I'm gonna get to that. Why is settling an exclusive mechanism to help you grow as a person? Now I'll ref you on your idea of like cultural lens and narratives and things like that. Okay. Settling, because when you, like, the whole idea of settling means that you stay in an uncomfortable position. It literally means that you don't have the ability to do nothing. You have to do something. Because it literally means you identified an issue and you have to, in some capacity, work on it, right? I think we can just prove that mechanism because one, people want to improve their relationship because it's important to them. And two, if you feel bad, you probably want to do something to make you feel better. So what does that working on it look like then? There's probably implied communication, which means you tell the other person, hey, you make me feel bad because of X, Y, Z. And then the consequence of that is that the onus on you as a person on how to react to that situation, right? So you either will, A, identify that that person will not change for me, and that means that I have to do something to do that. Either I can personally resolve my own issues with my own insecurities in order to make myself feel better in that situation, or two, I'm going to be able to comply with how they are and compromise on what they want, because that means that, maybe I'll stop being as attached and needy, and that means that we can meet in the middle and still be okay with that situation. But in general, it doesn't matter if we prove success in the ability to grow as a person. It matters that we prove that there's the ability for you to reflect on yourself in the first place, and the ability for you to actually challenge your friends' like perception in the first place. We're not proving to you that every single person is going to be like, like super woke and thought out and like their own therapist after this, but it's the fact that you're in a situation you can challenge your own friends of thought and you can actually grow as a person as that capacity. How do we weigh against OG, and then how do we actually challenge OO? Okay, OG weighing basically says that having a family is good. We tell you that our impact is a lot more concrete because in every single situation in which you're in a relationship and you challenge yourself to be in this comfortable position, growth occurs. Secondly, on the idea of OO, and cultural barriers and narratives telling you to serve others, we don't really necessarily think it's a knowledge gap. It's a priority or value difference, right? Like you already know this man might not be perfect for you, but you know that you as a person just value appeasing your parents. Or my partner would send or around too.
On our side, we believe entering more relationships is good, even if the relationships are all bad. because the net utility, because there's more relationships in the first.
You just gave my speech, I don't need to speak it.
Even a happy relationship is terrible.
Sorry, give me 1 sec to like.
More relationships.
I need the Liam McGarry minute. Hold on.
You go get some water.
We would prefer 1,000 terrible
We'll kill a
abusive
whole tree
relationships
for
over
speech.
one good relationship.
I truly apologize. How terrible it is. Does anyone care if I record my speech on my phone? No. Cool. John? Emma? All good?
Yeah.
This is clearly a closing half debate. Closing opposition is going to make 3 claims in this round. Firstly, we're going to explain why this narrative allows people to figure out their red lines in relationships. Secondly, we're going to concede all of OG's analysis and explain why it's better that you pursue more relationships. And third, we're going to explain why you allow people to justify not pursuing your relationship on status quo, and that's good. First, when do we think this narrative actually activates in the most salient way? I think it's uniquely when you enter a relationship for the first time. Think about this panel, there's a temporal nuance here. The reason why is because you're usually unaware of your preferences before you enter a relationship for the first time. Therefore, as you then progress through that relationship, you're more likely to figure out what are your red lines. What I mean by that is you're more likely to figure out what you are willing to compromise on and what you are not willing to compromise on. This is something, a preference that you're going to make, which is going to further continue for every other relationship that you pursue in the future, and it's also something that's going to adapt. We're going to explain why that's important. But more importantly here, we're going to concede all of OG's analysis. So if it's less likely that you're going to pursue one single long-term relationship on our side of the house, we're going to explain why this is good. Firstly, we think that new experiences are just good. So the point at which you are able to enter more relationships, that's more times that you're able to adapt your preferences, and more times that you're able to actually figure out what you want out of a relationship in terms of a long term. But secondly, we're able to co-opt all of closing government's analysis, because just on a larger scale, because everything they explain in terms of personal growth is multiplied by how many relationships you get into. But three, obviously people are smart. This is a really important nuance here. You don't stump your partner after one mistake. The norm here is, I'm going to communicate with my partner, and if there's no change, then the red line is, I'm going to leave that partner, but only after they don't change. I'm not going to settle for that person that doesn't want to change for me. But secondly, this is really crucial here too, and it's going to respond to closing government's analysis. Communication is a two-way street. So you are going to give feedback to your partner, but your partner is also going to give feedback to you. This is why the point at which you enter more relationships, you get more amounts of feedback on our side of the house, which means that you're more likely to be able to figure out what are the issues that you have, and how you're able to become a better person and a better communicator on all those things. That's really important on our side of the house. Thirdly, why is this actually important in this round? Firstly, I think love is irrational. That's to say, so love and attraction causes literal brain changes in your brain chemistry. Emotional and physical attraction, which is a prerequisite to actually getting into a relationship, literally cause you to be irrational because your brain is unable to process things in a rational way. Therefore, the narrative is necessary here because it's necessary to reassert your red lines. So when you're in that relationship that you got into irrationally, but then you think to yourself, hold on, the narrative is to not settle down. If that is true, then I know what my preferences are because I was able to perfect those preferences in past relationships. I'm now able to adapt that to my current relationship and get it and decide whether or not I want to continue in this relationship based on my preferences. That's really important. So the narrative counteracts your irrationality at the point at which you've gotten to that relationship in the first place. Thirdly, we're going to explain why being single is a better alternative than a relationship that doesn't align with your values. One, as life goes on, you're more likely to grow resentment in your partner. So everything that Kyla explains, so the point at which this person doesn't actually align with your values, you're more likely to grow resenting of them. But the more important impact here is that you feel guilty for doing that. You feel guilty because you don't think it's their fault. I've been in a relationship with this person for 60 years, but now I hate them because they don't align with my preferences. How? That's not really their fault. So you feel guilty for doing that. But third, you lose out on a lot of benefits of being single. So there's a zero-sum game when you're in a relationship, when you spend time with your partner versus spending time at work, versus spending time with your friendships, versus spending time on your hobbies. These are all utility maximizing activities that you otherwise could have done that you can't do anymore because it's a zero-sum game in terms of time. We all have limited time, but this debate is about how we spend it. Lastly, I'm going to explain then why we are able to justify not pursuing a relationship. This is really important because we're able to access a better set of actors than opening opposition is. The premise of this argument is many people don't want to pursue a relationship at all. Compare this to the opening opposition claim, which is about the fact that there are certain groups of people that want to reject a relationship with a specific person that they're forced to get into a relationship with. This is important. Our claim is more broad. They've actually managed to, they've made a more specific claim, but the fact that it's more specific has actually made the impact much smaller. The reason why is twofold. Firstly, I'm unclear on the scope of their impact. That's to say, if you're in a situation where you are in a literal coerced marriage, like a forced marriage, you probably aren't affected by the narrative. I'm so sorry. I don't know if a woman who's in rural India is gonna be able to tell her parents that oh, I don't want to marry this guy because fucking Judith Butler fucking told me that I should not settle down. I think that's not gonna fly. But more importantly, I think that the actual importance here is our claim is much more broad, which is that there are many people in society that just don't want to be in a relationship at all. These are women that don't want to focus on their careers. These are people that are disillusioned by past relationships and don't want to enter a new one. The problem, though, is that as every other team has identified, there are significant social narratives to find a partner. So literally the entire opening fucking government case is what people are told since they're children, which is that you need to find a partner, you need to find someone to be with for the rest of your life. Therefore, the importance here is agency. So the point at which this narrative exists, you give these people a reason. You give these people a justification to tell to their friends. You give these people a justification to tell to their parents, which is a socially accepted justification to be able to tell them, I'm not in a relationship because I haven't found a man that suits me. I haven't been in a relationship where I feel like the man has treated me well. That is a much more societally accepted narrative narrative, the point at which this narrative actually exists. But more importantly, I think that the point at which you're able to prioritize your preference maximization, that means you're able to maximize your agency. I think generally agency equals preference maximization equals happiness debate. Awesome. If Ari can get away with that, I can get away with that too. The difference here is that you allow these people to have a reason why. Before I go on, closing. Okay. Yeah, fuck you. Okay, I don't know what else I had. On opening government, I explained why literally all of opening government's argumentation is irrelevant in this round. The norm is not absolutist. The norm is something that not everyone follows, and not everyone follows to the same degree. This is really important in this debate, because the point at which Kyla tells you, oh no, but what about religious people or what about two people that have different religions? Or what about people that come from different backgrounds? Or all these things. Kyla is literally proof that you can pursue a long-term relationship regardless of the norm existing or not. Literally, Kyla's own mechanisms are the situation in which she describes is a situation in which she actually is existing in. Which is, like, the fact that she exists as a person and her relationship exists means that her case, knifes her own case. Which is something that I've never been able to say before, but I guess I can now. So, the point at which these norms are not absolutist, there are people in this world that find a love that is able to persist through the norm. There are people that are able to, despite the norm and despite other norms that exist in society, find a love and find and be able to pursue a long-term relationship that they really want to. And because agency is good. So proud to, I don't even know.
Thank you very much for that wonderful statement.
Wait, if I break up with my partner right now, will that happen?
Yes. Break up right now.
I'm kidding, it's recorded.
Don't settle. Don't settle. Cut them all separate.
Yeah, go for it.
I will begin on my first
No, that's okay. I'm not listening. Also, I'm kidding. I love my partner too much for the cost of her debate. Just to be upfront. Sorry. She was so much.
You're taking over everything else in your life.
No, I think over. No, it doesn't work.
I don't know. All right.
Sorry.
Order. I know I'm gonna be
Yeah, my time will begin on my. Wait, do you need to charge this? Is Sherry charging the thing, or am I going?
What?
Wait, are you charging the laptop?
It doesn't work.
Oh, okay.
Okay, yeah.
Don't ignore it.
Okay, time will begin on my first word. I think I'm just gonna start this debate, since we're already on personal subjective examples. I'm gonna start this debate by putting the quibbling over what settling means to rest by putting Joy on blast for a bit. So before this motion came up, Joy was showing me some of her prospective Hinge partners, right? And she was talking about how this one guy was kind of annoying, but she still kind of wanted to further pursue that relationship. And I was trying to tell her to not settle, right? I think in that moment, I wasn't trying to tell her to not get married to that guy and have kids. I was just trying to tell her to not necessarily pursue that relationship further, maybe try something else. And I think this is fairly intuitive. When any of you have ever told your friends not to settle, you're not telling them to not settle down and have a family. You're telling them to not necessarily settle for continuing to work out the differences in this relationship. So I think that therefore kind of takes out this opening understanding that settling is somehow about necessarily settling down and having a family and kids and all this stuff. I don't know why any of this is necessarily true. Intuitively, just think about it. That's not what settling means. There are other narratives that do mean that. I don't think that you shouldn't settle narrative is about that. I don't think that part of the debate is relevant at all. So what am I going to do for you then? I'm going to do a few things for you. I'm just going to go team by team and tell them what they tell you, why what we ultimately tell you beats them, and I'm going to start off by just refuting some of the things we hear most approximately out of our opposing closing team and refuting them, right? So what is the most important stuff that comes out of Edward? Edward tells us that this helps you draw red lines in relationships, and he tells you that he can co-opt our benefits because, there's a net utility here. You get into more relationships, therefore you're surely able to work out your personality and develop as a person more. I think this is untrue for a few reasons. I think first of all, red lines exist anyways, right? That is to say that when I tell someone they shouldn't settle or should settle, I'm not telling them they shouldn't or should settle for someone who's really bad, or has very, very visible red flags. And I think those are usually the red lines there, where if someone is very, very incompatible with your personal beliefs, with something that is very meaningful to you, politically in a way, if they believe in an idea that is fundamentally harmful to you, or are literally physically or emotionally abusive, I think this is likely to be weeded out by other narratives in society anyways that tell you that you shouldn't get with someone who's bad for you, or just weeded out by your personal preference, in that at this point settling isn't about settling and working things out with someone who you're kind of different from. It's about presumably like just like being with someone who makes you hate yourself. And this isn't like, I don't think that's within the scope of this debate. I don't think Edward could come out and say that he can just call that red lines are actually very important here. But I think he also can't call out our mechanisms, because what he tells you is that getting into more relationships is good. We think this is untrue because we uniquely analyze why trying to pursue this long-term relationship is what actually creates that growth, right? Their side has to defend not settling, and when you don't settle, that means that Joy finds this prospective partner like a little annoying, and she just doesn't go on that second date instead of actually like extending the realm in which this relationship can be real, right? So obviously you're not going to get any of this growth and working out differences between people in a mature way, because you do leave at first signs of like small things, because you are not settling. You're looking for that perfect person, someone who fulfills all of these desires within you, so you're staying in the chase, right? We think that's what settling is. Settling is about like trying to put down the chase and just trying a relationship with someone, and like doing it long term for some amount of extent. And I think that's what actually gets our benefits. We think this weighs out over our opening as well, because what our opening tells us is that for a lot of their benefits to work, you must end up in like a happy, decent marriage, right? They don't talk about divorce at all. No one really talks about divorce or like bad relationships, custody battles, any of this stuff. But like presumably that is like that is like a contingency in their case that they just don't really address. We're able to win in every world because we tell you that so long as you try and pursue this longer term relationship with someone, you're actually able to get these benefits even if that relationship fails. Because that relationship could fail. This person could like do something that crosses the red line later on, like cheat on you, that results in it ending anyways. But that doesn't matter because we think there is still some level of like being able to work out your differences with someone, understanding that it's not just about your preferences, that a relationship is about working out differences, understanding each other, and helping each other grow, right? That's something that you can only uniquely access on our side when we tell you that we access relationships that are longer term, but we don't either force people into very, very long-term, settled down relationships, and we also aren't telling people to just like cycle through relationships. So more reputation on this team, Sherry, and yeah. Sorry. What they tell us, I think a lot of their cases just kind of like weird. Like, I'm not sure exactly what they tell us, but what they're telling us fundamentally is that a lot of the impact of this is somehow on like women who are subject to other like narratives and in like patriarchal societies that are very oppressive. But Sherry herself tells us that like narratives don't exist in a vacuum, right? And Joy is able to point out very succinctly that like when a woman who is in like a family that is very like traditional and is forcing her to marry someone who she doesn't like is exposed to this narrative, this doesn't change anything. Because it's not like she, in the status, like in a world where this narrative doesn't exist, believes that her partner is perfect for her. It's that she already knows she doesn't like this person, but the like value of trying to appease her family is already being weighed over that because of the things that she grows up with.
As Andrew's multiple heartbreaks show us, trying a bunch of relationships is likely to be more romantically traumatic. Our case's impact is not dependent on this. It's the ability to preemptively scan for relationships of people that best match your values.
Okay, but what Joy tells you is that there is a very large bias in your preemptive scanning for relationships that ultimately leads to worse relationships, right? Because what Joy tells us is that you aren't just a perfect arbiter of everything that is good for you. You are very, very biased towards, like, you think that you are fundamentally living life right, one way or another, right? Like, you are unlikely to challenge yourself on a lot of these ideas, and you tend to go through life believing that the ways you live and that the things that you believe are, like, at least to some degree reasonable and true. Therefore, you're very likely to, like, not notice your flaws and the things that you do that make relationships bad, right? So when you scan for these things, you aren't necessarily weeding out partners who are bad for you. You're also weeding out people who you are bad for, and you never grow for these people because there is no attempt to commit to work through these differences to actually have discourse with this person, right? Your side actually propagates like more rapid fire relationships because like on opening, I guess what like burden of thinking is that eventually you'll scan for the perfect person who will validate you and everything will be great forever. But even if that's true, Joy tells you that this is bad because that means you probably found someone who is just as needy as you and who kind of just like stays in this cycle of having certain issues with you, right? That means that you're probably going to stay like emotionally dependent on this person and not learn to grow to some degree because you're scanning for someone who is validating those tendencies that you have that might not necessarily be constructive to you as a whole, right? So I think this is kind of absurd. I think on their closing, what they tell us is that you should actually go through a bunch of these like small relationships. We have here no idea like why other than just like, oh, net utility, more relationships probably means you can just do this at a greater scale. It's kind of absurd. I don't think that's true. And I think ultimately there are presumably other narratives on leaving bad relationships, so their red lines thing also doesn't make much sense. So what are we ultimately winning this debate on? We win this debate because we are fundamentally telling you that the most beneficial relationships are accessed on our side, right? Our opening kind of tries to convince you that the only good relationship is getting married and having kids, which is like very, very high burden, and I don't think they prove it enough. We're able to have contingency for a lot more cases. The other opening, they try to tell you that, oh, you can just scan for the perfect person, but Joy is able to very clearly prove to you that the perfect person from that perception is not actually the perfect person that's worse for you. And then ultimately, the other closing, they try to tell you that more relationships are good. We think this is kind of absurd. We uniquely tell you that it's quality relationships, whether they stay or not, that are actually the terminal impact. So proud to whatever we are.
Thank you very much for that wonderful speech. I am closing out the session with do you close out the session?
Again. So I'm going to talk about OO, then I'll talk about Gov. So why do we win over OO? I think it's for a few reasons. The first is I think, as Sherry was very disapproving during Edward's speech, I think they do, and to their credit, talk a little bit about why, this might give some women some reason as to like not pursue a relationship. But I think what Edward does a lot more in his speech is to explain specifically to what extent this happens to a larger extent. And secondly, to why, like what the actual impact here actually is. Which is that when you are pursuing a relationship always, you're just not really growing from that, and you're doing a lot of things that you otherwise, that make you upset when you otherwise could have been spending that time and effort on other things. For example, if I am really into Pokemon cards, and I have a girlfriend, and me being in a relationship means I have to buy my girlfriend dinner instead of buying myself Pokemon cards, I think me being able to buy those Pokemon cards might provide me with more utility, but I'm not able to do those types of things anymore on the proposition side of the house. Especially if this is someone that I don't really care about, and I know that this isn't someone I'm going to marry eventually. I'm just not sure why this matters significantly. I think everyone assumes that relationships are good. Edward uniquely explains why relationships are sometimes bad. Firstly, closing government. I think closing government's case is really confusing. The first problem I have with it is they don't never explain as to why we need to grow in these specific ways, right? So if I'm dating somebody that I really couldn't give two fucks about, right? Like they're just somebody that I match on Hinge, and like there's a bunch of things I don't like about their personality, but I'm deciding to try it out. I think eventually when I break up with this individual, as CG concedes, there's probably not a lot that I derive from this. If anything, I believe that this was someone I was dating just to pass some time, for example. Maybe it's someone that I was dating to pursue some degree of preferences. But I'm not sure why I need to figure these preferences out when Edward already explains to you that you can figure your preferences